put the leave. Question number 3, Chris Bishop.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. How is the government's economic plan helping New Zealand families?
Good question.
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the government's economic program is helping New Zealand families in a number of ways. This includes in particular ensuring the economy is growing and supporting more jobs and higher incomes. And members will recall that Budget 14 in May invested almost $500 million more in the well-being of New Zealand's children and families. This comprehensive package included extending paid parental leave out to 18 weeks, increasing the parental tax credit from $150 a week to $220 a week, extending free doctors' visits and prescriptions to children under 13, providing another $155 million for early childhood centres, and setting aside more than $33 million extra to help vulnerable children.
Supplementary, Mr Speaker.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
How is the government's focus on supporting a growing economy translating into more jobs and higher incomes for New Zealand families?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, the latest gross domestic product data shows our economy grew by 3.9% over the 4 quarters to June 2014. That puts New Zealand amongst the faster growing developed economies in the world. By comparison, figures out just yesterday in Australia, for example, showed its economy grew by a respectable 2.7% in the 4 quarters to September. New Zealand's growing economy is supporting more jobs and higher incomes. In the year to September, an extra 72,000 new jobs have been created across New Zealand. And average hourly wages rose 2.3% over the last year, compared with the cost of living rising by just 1% over the same period.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
Mr Speaker, what other indicators confirm that the growing economy is helping New Zealanders to get ahead under their own steam?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I can point to a number of additional indicators that are helping New Zealanders get ahead under their own steam. Firstly, unemployment continuing to fall. At 5.4%, the unemployment rate is now the lowest since March 2009 and well ahead of Australia, where unemployment is sitting at 6.2%. Secondly, mortgage interest rates are expected to remain lower for longer. The average floating mortgage rate is around 6.7%, yet it's considerably lower than the levels of almost 11% back in 2008. And finally, New Zealand's household savings rate has now been positive for 5 consecutive years, something that has not happened since the early 1990s. In fact, before 2010, household savings had been negative in all but 1 year since 1995.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Chris Bishop.
How do some of the key economic indicators affecting New Zealand families compare to the situation the National-led government inherited 6 years ago?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, they have certainly made good progress. On just about every score, economic indicators affecting household budgets are better now than they were 6 years ago. I mentioned the cost of living, for example, increased by just 1% in the last year. In late 2008, consumer price inflation was running at more than 5%. I'd count that one back if I were you. As I've also mentioned, New Zealand's economy is now growing quite strongly, and the outlook is for further solid growth into the future. Back in 2008, the economy was mired in recession nearly a year before the global financial crisis struck. Little wonder then, Mr Speaker, that Kiwis are voting with their feet.
Order. The level of noise coming from my left is simply unacceptable. Sorry to interrupt the Minister if he complete his answer.
Mr Speaker, little wonder then that Kiwis are voting with their feet and either staying home or coming home. Net migration from Australia to New Zealand was positive in the month of October for the first time in 21 years.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
How are New Zealand families being helped by the lowest rate of home ownership in 60 years, housing costs increasing far faster than incomes, and the fact that the average house price in Auckland earned more in a year than the average worker did?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I'll pick out the second one of that member's to answer, and he's wrong, because in actual fact, the survey he refers to talks about how people are spending more on their houses, but they're paying down their mortgages.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Is he still committed to his promise to increase average annual full-time wages by $10,500 a year? And if so, how is that helped by the annual growth in average weekly earnings slumping to their lowest level in 4 years?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the Minister of Finance, I think the member is referring to a Treasury projection for the period 2017-18. But nevertheless, of course, it's very important that real wages increase. Just listen, Mr. Robertson, you might pick something up. The real wages, it is important that real wages increase, and under this government, that's exactly what's happening. Whereas under the previous government, inflation, just give it a minute, Grant.
Order.
You've had your turn. Under the previous government, prices were rising faster than wages. Under this government, wages are rising faster than prices.
Order. Before I call the next question, I just want to remind all ministers particularly that it's not acceptable to use simply a Christian name. I acknowledge the minister was responding to an interjection, and the interjection was probably not helpful to the order of the House, but it is absolutely expected at all times that members will be addressed properly in this House.